Hello everyone, I'm going to give my response to a video entitled Ninja Martial Arts Digging Deeper. It is by Antony Cummins on the Samurai and Ninja History channel. The original will be linked in the description. I suggest that you watch it after this video or before continuing to provide the full context of what I am replying to. This is certainly not meant to be an answer to the issues he brings up. I am just suggesting a couple of other elements that I think should be taken into consideration. There is a word I'm going to be using quite a lot, which is ryuha. A ryu is a tradition, school, or style of doing something. A ryu can come in many forms: etiquette, flower arranging, cooking, and so on. However, in this context, we are referring specifically to martial arts traditions. Ryuha is the same idea, but it is used when not being part of the name of a specific tradition. And I'm going to be using the word samurai as it is commonly used in the West to mean a member of the warrior class for ease of discussion. The original video, I think, can be summed up by this quote: "We do not know what most of the martial arts were in the samurai times. At the time, it was most important to know what about martial arts in the warring period." End quote. Mr. Cummins starts with Iga and Koka, but then talks about Japan in general. And it is this Japan in general that I am going to talk about. I think that it can inform his question of why it is so difficult to, as he says, pin down what martial arts the ninja did, and also the samurai more generally. But I might be giving myself too much credit, although I'm just not going to go into the ninja or shinobi no mono stuff. By and large, we do not know what particular ryuha most samurai practiced in the Sengoku period. This is assuming there were ryuha most of the samurai practiced to begin with, which, as we will see, might be misplaced. We do know the types of skills that would be common, such as sojutsu spearmanship, kinjutsu swordsmanship, and so on. But I think that Mr. Cummins is referring to specific ryuha rather than general skills. We also know of some ryuha that existed back then. Some still exist today that can give us some insights. However, in an interview I will link in the description, Dr. Carl Friday estimates that only a small portion of samurai were training in organized ryuha at any given time before the Edo period. There is this image of samurai being full-time fighting men whose only task was to prepare for and engage in war, at least during the Sengoku period. Most samurai, though, were not full-time fighting men. For much of the Sengoku period, they were landlords and administrators, and those duties took up a good chunk of their daily business. Most samurai were not big-name, extremely wealthy, famous figures. Most were the kokujin and jisamurai, local landholding warrior gentry. These were kind of the base-level village samurai. Quite a few of these, albeit not all though, had to do farming themselves in order to get by, in addition to being the landlord. Sometimes these kokujin and jisamurai families would have smaller kokujin and jisamurai families as their retainers. The relationship and interactions between these kokujin, jisamurai, as well as other social status families was extremely complex, which is a topic I plan to go into in future videos. But for now, the point is to look at why it is so difficult to find out what ryuha samurai practiced. Most of the earliest organized ryuha seem to date from the 1400s. There was one school I know of, Ninryu, which no longer exists itself, founded in the late 1300s, but there could be others. This, of course, does not mean that there was no martial training before, but I am trying to stay focused on the kind of organized ryuha, although calling them organized at this point is still kind of questionable. These newly formed ryuha were usually local and regional in nature. For example, a branch of the previously mentioned Ninryu, Meniwa Ninryu, was associated almost entirely with Maniwa village for most of its history. While the name was known and they had a reputation, the skills of the ryuha itself had limited spread. Of course, there was some spread of ryuha, especially some of the more famous ones. Oftentimes, though, this spread would be in relatively small numbers, but it would vary. So, I do not want to give the impression that all ryuha were completely locked into only a specific area all of the time either. And you will see people associated with ryuha that are not from their region, although those ryuha tend to be the exceptions rather than the norm during the Sengoku period. Being local in nature, their documentation might have been minimal, and in a period where records were commonly lost or destroyed, finding such information might prove difficult. It is possible, though, that there might be more documentation that is still able to be found, but just hasn't yet. This is one of the reasons why I think there is still value in asking these questions and trying to find answers. Another aspect of why so much is missing and is hard to pin down is that most samurai probably were not formally trained in a particular ryuha in a dojo. In the Sengoku period, martial arts training was usually not that organized. As Mr. Cummins mentions, the whole dojo culture is more of an Edo period thing. Even many of the more famous and organized ryuha were less organized than they are today. Most samurai were probably trained less formally. The core of their martial arts training most likely came when they were young, probably by their father, grandfathers, uncles, older brothers, cousins, maybe some retainers if their family had any, or possibly other closely associated older males. This is probably how most samurai boys first began learning martial arts. When old enough, they may have begun going on hunts in order to improve their archery. They may have engaged in fun play sumo wrestling with friends. Boys and men from different local samurai families may have gathered at a residence or at the local shrine or temple and trained together on occasions, bringing what they had been taught at home with them. They may have also talked about what they had read and learned from war manuals, if they had any. Those with battlefield experience would share what they learned from those experiences with those who did not have any. Particular ryuha may have had some influence on what the young samurai were taught in these less formal situations. There is documentation of such informal training get-togethers in general happening in the records of various shrines and temples. A number of variables would have influenced just how this actually took place and the forms it took. But martial training by the majority of samurai probably was not how most people today would imagine it. Both of these elements would make figuring out what most samurai trained in during the Sengoku period difficult in regards to specific ryuha, as it is quite possible that most of them did not have a specific ryuha that they trained in. However, that does not mean that there is no value in asking and looking for answers. We do not know if we will find the answers, but in doing so, we increase our knowledge of the subject. I hope you have enjoyed this video. This is actually just touching on something I was planning to do much more meticulously in a future video, but since the conversation has kind of come up, I am doing this one now. I could have replied to the original video in a comment post, but I thought I would do something a little bit different and share it here. I really appreciate you taking the time to watch or listen to this. Thank you so much. If you did enjoy, please consider leaving a like and subscribing. I look forward to seeing comments and conversations below. Please feel free to share this video as well. If you want to follow the channel on social media, the links will be in the description. I hope to see you again in the next video. Until then, take care.